All right, so in today's video, we're going to take a look at something a little bit different and something a little bit cool. We're going to be having a look at this guy here. This is the AxisFlying 256 thermal analog FPV camera. And this is a proper thermal night vision camera. This cannot see visible light at all. This is very much a infrared seeing camera. It can see heat. It cannot see light at all. It is a proper night vision camera. Now, I did buy this camera myself and it was quite expensive. It was about $280, which sort of works at about £220. I do just want to say thank you to one of my subscribers. I can't remember your name, I'll put it down here. But thank you to you because you donated quite a large chunk of money towards me buying this camera, and I am very, very grateful for it. Now, this is, like I said, a thermal FPV camera, so it can see heat. And the reason why I bought this is about a month or so ago, I did a couple of videos where I was playing around with the Cadex Infra analog FPV camera, which is an extremely good low light, like night vision camera. And I had a lot of fun. Like, I made my own pair of like night vision goggles with that, and I kind of sort of explored the world with it a little bit. And then I put the infra on one of my drones. I was able to, for the first time in my life, to do some flying, in the pitch black. And it worked very, very well, but it does have its limitations. Like, it does still need at least a little bit of light. And I said when I made those videos that I would love to, have a proper thermal, like night vision camera. And that is why I've bought this. So I can now do some sort of playing around with flying in the absolute, completely pitch black. Not rely on any kind of light at all. It doesn't matter whether the moon's out, whether it's cloudy. I can go to the middle of nowhere in the pitch black and I should be able to fly. So this is going to be the goal. The goal is going to be to install this camera onto one of my drones so I can sort of do some night flying and play around for a little bit. But initially what I've done is I did the same as I did with my Cadex Infra camera. I ended up installing this directly onto a pair of my analog FPV goggles. And I basically made myself a pair of night vision goggles. So in this video, I'm just going to show you, kind of very quickly how I built the goggles. And then I'll show you some of the things that I did with the goggles, just to sort of like show off what this camera can do. Now, before I do that, I just want to very quickly talk to you about the unboxing, because, when I was doing research on this camera, I couldn't find any information out there at all about the camera. So I thought that, anyone else that's interested in this might just be interested to see what the unboxing experience was like. And the box that you get this camera in is very, very basic. It's literally just a black box and there's nothing written on it at all other than a sticker which just says 256. I should just point out that they do 3 different versions of this camera. There's a 256 version, a 384 version and a 640 version. The higher the number basically means the higher the resolution. But also the higher the cost. But yeah, so you get this very, very basic box with nothing written on it other than that sticker. When you open the box, there are then just 4 things. You get the camera in this little packet here. You then get a very basic wiring loom, which has 5 wires on it. You get a instruction manual. It's not really an instruction manual, it's more of just a data sheet, but it's got a bit of useful information on there. And then you just get a pack of screws. That is all that you get in the box. It's not particularly exciting or glamorous packaging, but it's entirely functional. Now, just to talk about the wiring loom. So actually in the instruction manual, it does sort of show you just sort of the pinout for the wiring loom. But basically there are 5 wires. So you've got a red wire for power, a black wire for ground, a yellow wire for video, analog video signal out. And then there's 2 other wires there which are used for UART control to some degree. Now, I'm not really sure what this UART control is all about. I did speak to AxisFlying and they say that it's not for connecting the camera to a flight controller or anything like that. It seems to be for sort of doing like debugging or programming or something with a bit of specialist software, which, I don't have. So obviously for my use case, I've just paid attention to the power wires and the video signal wires. Now, the voltage range of this camera is 5 volts to 16 volts. Which is a good wide voltage range, and obviously means it's compatible with most sort of like drones or flight controllers and things like that, which was obviously makes things nice and simple, nice and easy to use. So yeah, that's everything that you get in the box. And in terms of sort of getting this camera up and running, it's very simple. Just provide the camera with power and connect the analog video wire to obviously wherever you want to connect it. So as I said, where are they? I got my analog FPV goggles. These are the SkyZone Cobra X V2 goggles. And what I did, I'll put some pictures on the screen here. What I did is I just made a very basic little 3D printed mount, which I put in the top of the module bay on the goggles here. That's where I then just installed the camera with a bit of double-sided tape. And then as for the wiring for the camera, I literally just fed those wires directly into the pin header row, which is on the top of the goggles here. That's where the analog receiver module would plug in. But I just fed the wires from the camera directly into the pin headers there. And that is literally all there was to it. I just used a bit of mounting posse just to kind of hold the wires in place. Super simple stuff, but it works absolutely fine. Obviously, I'll put a schematic on the screen, so if anyone is interested in copying this, they can do that. And yeah, that's literally all it took to make my own pair of thermal night vision goggles. And then, yeah, once I'd done that, I then started kind of experimenting with them, just to see what the world looks like in sort of infrared and through like heat. So the first test that I did with the camera and all the goggles was during the day. That's just because that's when I put them together. And even though obviously like a thermal camera is sort of more orientated for like doing things in the nighttime, there was still plenty of interesting things to kind of see during the day. So one of the first things that I noticed straight away was that on the other side of the room, I had my GoPro on charge. And straight away I could see that, the GoPro was, very much glowing. Even though the camera was off, it was glowing. But what's more than that, so was the charger and the cable for it, which I thought was fascinating because, I went over and I touched the charger and the cable and I couldn't really feel any warmth, but you could clearly see that there was power flowing, through the charger, the cable and the camera. And like, that was just, that was really fascinating to see. That was very much the first thing that I saw, which I thought was really cool. Now I also had a look at my 3D printer because I happened to be running at the time, and not surprisingly there's a lot of heat coming out of that. 3D printers very much rely on heat for the way they work. But it's really interesting to obviously see not only the bits of the printer that you expect to be hot, obviously kind of glowing, but also like the compartment at the bottom where sort of the motherboard and the circuitry was. You can see sort of heat flowing around in there and stuff, and I just thought that was really interesting. Now I also looked at a electric heater. Obviously that's producing a lot of heat, so I mean, as you'd expect, that was glowing very, very brightly. But then I sort of experimented with just looking at my own hand, and sort of seeing that my own hand is glowing, and it's something that I was very surprised by as I experimented with this camera, is just how much heat human beings produce. But yeah, as you can see, my hand very much is glowing. What I thought was really interesting though is when I then put my hand on the wall for a moment and then took my hand away, and you see this this thermal imprint of your hands left on the wall. That was just really cool. And I actually ended up sort of drawing on the wall with my fingers. I drew this little smiley face here, which very much amused me. I know that probably seems like a very basic thing to get excited about, but I was very amused by that. Now, an interesting thing. So I went to then go and have a look out the window. And the first thing I did was I just pulled my net curtain back to have a look at the window. But I couldn't see anything outside. And I was very surprised by this, although I guess I shouldn't have really been surprised by it. But you can't see through clear glass with infrared. At least not with clear glass, which is designed to be thermally efficient. So the windows I've got here are double glazed. And obviously they are designed to sort of keep the heat in the property. And that means that, infrared, it just reflects off of the glass. It bounces back into the room rather than go out. So that means that, obviously as you're trying to look out the window, you can't see at the window. Instead, all you can see is your own reflection. And that just blew my mind. I was really just wowed by that. And it's something that, caught me out many, many times as I was experimenting with this camera. It's just like how many surfaces, like windows, but also like porcelain surfaces, metallic surfaces, how many surfaces actually end up acting like mirrors when you're looking at the world through infrared, rather than with visible light. But anyway, once I figured that out, I opened the window, I had a look outside, and yeah, I mean, you can still see with this camera, you know, pretty well in the daytime. It's a little bit harder, obviously, to work out what is hot versus what is cold, because, you know, during the day, a lot of things are sort of heated up by the sun and whatnot. It is winter here at the moment, so, you know, it was still quite cold outside, but largely it just looked like I was looking at the world through a black and white sort of camera, unless something sort of like really warm happened to go past, like a person walking by, for example. It just looked like an unusual image of the world with a black and white camera. But anyway, we'll talk more about sort of stuff I did outside a little bit later. So after I did that, I then thought, well, you know, this is a night vision camera, so let's go see what it's like in the dark. And it just so happens that my bathroom, where I live, there's no windows in there whatsoever. So if I go in there and I close the door, it's basically completely pitch black in there. So I went in there with the goggles to have a look around, and yeah, you can see really clearly. It was really quite amazing how much you could see. Bear in mind that there was no light source in the room. And it's important to stress as well that it wouldn't matter if there was a light source in the room, because this camera cannot see light. It cannot see visible light. I actually tested this. I got my phone torch out and, you know, I waved it around in front of the camera. It can't see the light at all. It's very much only seeing the heat. So even though I was in this bathroom in the dark, if I'd put the light on, that wouldn't have really made much difference, other than I guess the light may have heated up a few things in the room. But yeah, so when I was in the bathroom, I mean, like, it amazed me how much I could see. Again, I was really surprised. So, you know, around my bath, I've got some porcelain tiles. These are just normal white tiles. And, you know, to the visible eye, you can't see your reflection in them at all. They're not polished, shiny or anything like that. So you can't see reflection in them with visible light. However, with thermal, I could really clearly see my reflection, you know, coming back at me. And that really caught me out by surprise. And, you know, it was really awesome to see. Now, I did notice in the corner of my room, there's an extractor fan up there, which, you know, as far as I know, unless you're having a shower, the extractor fan is off. But as you can see, there's a little bit of heat coming out of it. There must be, you know, a little bit of power sort of flowing through it, even when it's idle. Now, there is a mirror in my bathroom, so obviously I had a look at myself in that, and, you know, very surreal seeing yourself in sort of infrared, but also extremely cool. Now, whilst I was in the bathroom, that's when I noticed that I was leaving footprints behind me. As you can see here on the ground where I had been stood and then I moved away, you very clearly get some footprints. I don't know why I was surprised by that. It's, you know, to be expected, isn't it? You know, your feet are warm, they're going to leave like a warm patch on the floor. But I was very surprised to see that. And yeah, these are the kind of things that just really amused me. I was just like, wow, that is like literally so cool. So yeah, that was just me kind of messing around in a pitch black room. As you can see pretty well in the pitch black with this camera. Now, one thing that I want to mention about this camera before we talk about my experiments with it in the dark, like outside at night, is the fact that the lens on this camera is quite telephoto. I don't have any sort of specs to sort of tell you or show you on exactly what the lens is. But as you can see here, the image that you get from the camera is quite zoomed in straight away. So that means that, you know, if you're in a small room or if you're trying to look at someone or something, you need to step back quite a lot to get the thing you want in focus. And I'm guessing this is for some reason kind of instrumental to how these kind of cameras work, because, you know, before buying this camera, I did quite a lot of research into thermal cameras, and I found that they all seem to have this property of the image being quite zoomed in. That is going to mean that, you know, when I install this on one of my aircraft at some point in the future, I'm probably not going to be able to use it as my main flight camera, just because the image is so zoomed in. It's going to make, especially things like landing, quite tricky. So I'm going to have to use a multi-camera setup with a video switcher. So yeah, I just thought that was something that was important to mention. Anyway, having played with the camera a little bit in the day, obviously I was most excited to play with it in the night. This is obviously supposed to be a night vision camera after all. So, I waited for sunset and then, I went out for a little drive. And I just headed out to a little car park, which is in the woods on the outskirts of town. It's a pretty dark location there. There's a couple of buildings in the far distance. They're probably at least a mile away. But yeah, to all intents and purposes, it was completely pitch black. And yeah, the first thing I had to look at actually was my car. Obviously, I'd just been driving the car, so obviously the engine had got warm from obviously being used, the tyres have got warm, and it's really fascinating to see that with my own eyes. Obviously, like I've seen like stuff like this on TV before, but it was really cool to see it for myself. What really amazed me was obviously, as you can see here, like the tyres are very much glowing, as you would expect, as are the brake pads that you can see through the spokes in the wheels. But also the entire wheel arch is glowing, and it looks like there's like a light inside the wheel arch which is illuminating them. I'm guessing that is literally just all the heat that's coming off the tyres. Heat tends to rise, so I'm guessing the heat that's coming off the tyres is rising up, and it's very much heated the inside of the wheel arch. I just thought that was really cool to see. Another thing which surprised me, but I found very cool. So you can see here that the inside of my car looks very, very bright. So in this shot at the moment, I've got the driver's side window open so you can see into the car. And yeah, everything is very brightly lit, and it looks like I've got the internal light on in the car. Now actually, there was no lights on whatsoever. What had happened was, because it's winter here, it's quite cold, so as I was driving to that location, I had the heater on in the car, and that had just heated up everything inside, and that's why everything appears to be glowing. If I look sort of closely at the air vents in the car, you can see these are the brightest parts. That's obviously where the heat was coming from. But it really amazed me, just how much everything inside the car was glowing. It literally looks like there was a light on inside the car. Now, going back to what I said earlier on about glass. So again, this just fascinated the hell out of me. If I look at sort of any of the other windows in the car, all the other windows are closed. They're just completely like a mirror. You cannot see into the car, no matter what. No sort of light or no infrared is able to get through the glass in the car. Everything just reflects off of the glass, so everything just turns into a perfect mirror. Again, that just absolutely amazed me and blew my mind. It was just so surreal to see that. And I even got my phone torch out and I shone it around inside the car to sort of provide illumination inside the car. But obviously it doesn't matter because this camera can't see light. It can only see infrared. So I just thought that was really interesting. Another thing I thought was interesting as well was when I looked at the front of my car and I looked at the registration plate, you couldn't see any letters or numbers written on the plate at all. You just saw this rectangle with no detail on it. And again, that's because the camera's not seeing light, it's seeing the infrared. And I guess the letters and the background the letters are printed on were all the same temperature, so therefore you just couldn't read them. I thought that was really interesting. Now, another thing that I found interesting whilst I was at that location was the fact that it was a completely clear night sky and all of the stars were visible. It was a really, really beautiful night, but this camera couldn't see any of the stars at all. I guess that kind of makes sense, really. I mean, this camera's trying to pick up heat, and I know the stars are obviously very hot, but because they're so incredibly far away, like this camera just isn't sensitive enough to pick up on that heat. So I guess, yeah, it's not surprising that the camera can't see any of the stars, but at the same time it did surprise me. I just thought that was a really interesting thing to mention. Also, just looking at trees. Trees are amazing to look at in sort of thermal, in infrared. It's amazing how much heat trees actually have. Especially this time of year, with it being winter, you think all the trees will be very cold, but I mean, look at them here, like they're all glowing, quite bright white. I just thought that was another thing that was really interesting, and it's kind of surprised me. Now, another thing that I found interesting whilst I was at this location was this other car, which is parked about 20 meters away from my car. As you can see, the tyres on this car are completely dark, and therefore I was able to deduce that that car had been parked there for quite a while. I just thought that was kind of an interesting novelty, that I was able to sort of deduce, how how long a car had been there, whether someone had arrived recently or not, based purely on just looking at the tyres and being able to see whether or not they were warm. Now, I was also able to deduce that the people inside the car were probably a little bit cold. Therefore, they'd been running the engine on their car. You can kind of see that by the fact that the front of the car is a little bit warmer. And also underneath the car, the ground was kind of glowing. Now, I'm guessing that's because obviously as they're running the engine, you know, the hot gases from the engine go through the exhaust, which goes under the car. And then all that heat from the exhaust is then sort of radiating down into the ground. I just thought that was really fascinating. Like, stuff like that just really blows my mind. I just thought that was really, really cool. Now, after spending a bit of time at this location on the edge of town where it was very, very dark, I decided to then head into town and go to a location where there's a little bit more activity going on, just to kind of have a look. And I ended up parking in a supermarket car park next to a petrol station. And yeah, I ended up just kind of like sort of filming sort of cars going by and sort of people walking around. And again, it was just fascinating. It was fascinating to see like sort of the cars drive past. You can kind of tell how long a car had been driving for based on like how hot the tires were, how hot the engine was. And it amazed me to see like how much heat is reflected from a car into the ground as they drive by. They all look like they've got like an underlight on them. If you remember like the Fast and Furious movies where they used to put like a light under the car. As cars drive by, they look like they've got an underlight on them, but it's not. It's literally just the heat from the car. It's radiating out and it's reflecting off the ground, and it's kind of creating this like this glowing effect under the car, which I thought was really cool to see. At one point, a cyclist went past me, and it was really interesting to see how hot his brake discs were. Obviously, you can very clearly see them. And also, it was really fascinating to see people. So whilst I was at this petrol station, like I could see sort of people walking in at the kiosk. And I was probably a good sort of like 100 meters away from them at that point. And it's just amazing how much heat human beings give off. I can entirely understand now why like the police and like search and rescue people use thermal cameras, because people really glow really brightly. Like, we release a lot of heat into the environment, and it's so easy to see a person from a distance with one of these cameras. So yeah, it was really fascinating just sort of watching sort of like people walk around, like vehicles move around. And it was also interesting just sort of like looking at sort of some of the buildings. So a couple hundred meters away from my car, there was a big building, and most of the lights in this building were off, but there was a couple of like lights that were on. I think that it's an apartment building, and one of the apartments had their lights on. Now with my eyes, I could clearly see that. I could see the windows that were lit up. I could even see into the rooms. But with the thermal camera, as you can see here, all of the windows looked exactly the same. You couldn't tell which one of those apartments had the lights on versus which ones didn't. Which I just thought was so sort of bizarre. And again, with glass acting like a mirror, you couldn't see into any of the apartments as well. All of the windows just appeared black, like there was no one home and there was nothing inside to see. I just thought that was another thing that was just really odd and really cool to see. Now, after being at this location, I then went to a couple of other locations. Again, just in the city, just sort of like watching sort of like people walk by, cars drive by, and you know, just find it all very fascinating. One thing that I sort of specifically did notice actually whilst I was parked in a little car park down there was actually you could tell which parking bays had been used recently and which ones hadn't, because the ones that had been used recently, there was kind of like a heat patch on the ground, which I'm guessing obviously the car's engine had just radiated some heat into the ground, and it kind of left like a footprint or a bit of a trace. I just thought that was really, really cool. I did also quickly just go and have a look at the river. I parked up by a little waterfall there. I was just kind of interested to see how that would look. And interestingly, actually, water, like going over a waterfall, looks much the same in infrared as it does to the eye. Obviously, as water goes down the waterfall, and sort of like it gets all frothy and it sort of starts jumping around everywhere. To your eye, it kind of looks white. Well, it looks exactly the same in infrared, but I'm guessing the difference is it's white because it's emitting heat because the water's been churned up. So not quite the same as what you see with your eye, but it's another thing that I thought was really interesting. But yeah, after that, I then came home, and then the last thing I did was I just kind of played around with the camera a little bit with my daughter. And we spent a bit of time just sort of like drawing on the walls with our hands a little bit. The really interesting thing is when I got a hairdryer and I turned that on, weirdly, a hairdryer acts almost like a torch. So you can see as I sort of turn it on here, like the end of it starts glowing, and it looks obviously like it's emitting light. But then if I sort of then aims the hairdryer at myself, it looks like it's casting light onto my body, like a torch would. Although then obviously as I move the hairdryer away, the part of me that got heated up stayed heated up. I just thought that was really interesting. Another thing as well is that I went and made a drink partway through doing this, and the tap splashed me a little bit. And I mean a little bit, like I barely even noticed that the tap splashed me, but in the thermal, in the infrared, as you can see here, I look like I'm absolutely soaked. I look like I'm completely covered in water. I just thought it was really just interesting to see. Like I said, to the eye, you couldn't see any of the water and I couldn't feel it. But yeah, on the thermal infrared, it was really obvious where, you know, the water had splashed me. Other than that, I mean, one weird thing that me and my daughter did was like we were playing around with a towel for a little bit. And it's really weird that if you put your face behind the towel and just press your face into the towel, after a few seconds, this weird kind of like ghostly imprint of your face starts to radiate through the towel. I just thought that was another thing which was just like really cool and just really surreal. So yeah, as you can see, I just spent, you know, a day just playing with this thermal camera and just having a lot of fun, just kind of exploring the world and seeing it in this completely different way. It's just totally amazing to me, just how different the world looks like. And I think largely this is why I became a drone pilot back in the day. I've always had a fascination with kind of exploring the world, like seeing the world in different ways. Obviously being a drone pilot allows me to see the world from a different perspective, allows me to see it from above. But yeah, I very much have a sort of an interest in sort of like different types of like cameras and sort of seeing the world in different parts of the spectrum. So yeah, so anyway, that was just kind of my experimentation with this camera, and hopefully you've enjoyed just sort of watching me kind of mess around with it for a little bit. But yes, in the next video that I'm going to be doing about this camera, I'm going to have this camera installed onto one of my drones, onto one of my aircraft. It'll either be my Atom RC Fear, which is already equipped with the Caddx Infra for night flying, or I might put it on my Hewing T2. I'm not decided yet, but it'll be on one of those aircraft. So yeah, the next video, we'll actually get some flight footage out of this camera, and we'll actually have a look at the world from above in thermal, in infrared. So yeah, that's basically all I've got to say for this video though. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. If you have, please do give it a like, and yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers guys, bye. Okay, so here's something a little bit weird. So I'm currently stood in a field on a nice sunny day. I've got the sun behind me, and as you can see on the phone footage there, I've casted a shadow across the ground. Nothing unusual about that. If you look at the thermal view, you can also see the exact same shadow being cast on the ground. There's my head, there's my body, there's my legs. But this is the weird thing though, is because the shadow you're seeing on the ground from the thermal camera, that's not a shadow of light, that's a shadow of heat. Obviously as the sun is beating down on the ground here, it's making the ground hot, but my body blocking some of the sun's light and therefore some of the sun's heat. So you're not actually seeing a shadow, you're just seeing a cool patch that's on the ground. Look what happens when I now walk away from where I'm stood. Look at that. It's literally just left my shadow, or a thermal shadow, in the shape of me on the ground. Isn't that the strangest thing? It's fading quickly, obviously as the sun's heating up that bit of ground, but yeah, isn't that the strangest thing? This stuff's so cool.